Gene Roddenberry was given a consultant position, and Harv Bennett became responsible to the studio for the making of the picture.
My first task was to see Star Trek, and that I did. It took me about 3 months, and I ran 76 or 77 series episodes on 16 millimeter in a flickering projection room. It occurred to me, or at least it was the basis of my later work, that it was a trinity, literally a triangle of Kirk at the top, Spock, Bones. That these three men represented the dimensions of the show. Logic from Spock, passion from Bones, and there's Kirk who has to say, we have to do it this way. I accept logic. I myself am passionate. I resolve these conflicts. And so I determined immediately that this had to be a story, too, had to be a story about that trinity.
I've never been afraid.
But you left at the very time mankind needed courage.
We offered the world order.
And Space Seed haunted me because it had flickered off the screen and it said, here is this remarkable performance by a great actor, Ricardo Montalban. He dominated the show, and yet the conflict between him as a super person and the triangle of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy almost defeats the triangle. And yet when they overcome him, he's like Osama bin Laden. Where is he? What do you do with him? And so they decide to exile him to some far place.
Would be interesting, Captain, to return to that world in 100 years and learn what crop had sprung from the seed you planted today.
Yes, Mr. Spock. It would indeed.
And I remember thinking, stop the projector. I got it. We will see him again in this movie.
And so began a series of writing and rewriting. Leonard didn't want to be in the film. I thought he was kidding. I thought, and you know, I know him well, and now I didn't know him so well then, and I thought it was a negotiating ploy. And I'm not so sure. He still insists that it wasn't, that he genuinely didn't want to be in Star Trek again. But I think it was the most glorious negotiating ploy, and I think he got $100 a week more as a result of insisting that he didn't want to be in it. So they were going to kill him off.
Leonard had written a book called I Am Not Spock, which he later revised into I Am. And Leonard was going to be not interested in doing this film. I had worked with Leonard when I was at Universal, so I knew him, respected him. And I came up with a notion, this was in the early stages of the story development with Jack Sowards. And what the development was is, I met with Leonard after a performance of a one-man play he was doing. I said, look, Leonard, I know you don't want to do this, but we need you, and in order to do it...
He said to me, how would you like to have a great death scene?
And his own ears went up, because he's an actor.
And that was the first I heard of this idea.
So Harv Bennett brought me into the office one day, and he said, we got to kill Leonard, we got to kill Spock off. And I had a thought. So I acted it out for Harv in his office. Clear door, engine room, me on the other side of the door, hands to the door. And I fell out of my chair and I brought my hand down. We touched. Couldn't get him out of there. Couldn't be brought out. He was dying. And the two of us, side by side, but separated by a permaglass, a very clear, polished clear so we could see him rather than diffusion. If the door had been opaque somewhat, so we couldn't see him through the glass door, through the plastic door, I think it would have been better just to see the outline of him crying. But they insisted on seeing him. I didn't know whether that did the movie any good. But I suppose it did.
So I thought maybe this is appropriate, because certainly this will be the last of the Star Trek movies if they make this one. I can't see them making any more. And maybe it would be an interesting final curtain for the Spock character to go out in a blaze of glory, so to speak. So I said, let's explore it. Tell me what you have in mind. And he eventually sent me a script, which I received while I was in Israel doing the Woman Called Golda project. And I was not crazy about it. I thought the Spock function in the script was not clear. I thought the death scene was potentially touching. It came early in the movie, and I thought it was perhaps out of place.
I was absolutely buffaloed. Karen Moore was an executive with Paramount Television at that time. And Karen said, I think I know who can help you. She said, he's a friend of mine named Nick Meyer. I said, Nick Meyer? Nick Meyer, 7% Nick Meyer?
I got into Star Trek in a very roundabout fashion. It was a Sunday evening, and I was barbecuing hamburgers. And my friend Karen Moore, who was then an executive at Paramount, was cooking French fries or something, and she said to me, Nicky, if you want to learn how to be a director, you should direct. You shouldn't sit on your rear end in this house holding your breath because you can't get what you want. Now, if my mother had said that to me, I probably would have not paid attention, but there are things that you can hear from friends that you can't hear from. And she went on to say, I have a friend down at Paramount, he's a very gifted guy named Harv Bennett that you would like. And he's been assigned to do the next Star Trek film. Why don't you go and talk to him? And I said, Star Trek, is that the one with the man with pointy ears? And she said, that's the one.
Nicholas is a man of enormous talent and enormous energy. He's a man of great decision. He's a man who walks into a room and says, okay, let's go.
I came back to LA from Israel for a 1-week visit where I had a break in the shooting, and for the first time I met Nicholas Meyer, who was to direct the film. I had never met him before. And I walked into Harv Bennett's office and sat down, and I was introduced to Nick, and he said, what do you think of the script? And I said, I'm not pleased with it. I don't like it. And he said, much to my surprise and relief, I agree with you. I thought, well, that's a very refreshing kind of comment coming from people who are about to make a movie.
And I said, why don't we make a list? It could be a character, it could be a scene, it could be a plot, it could be a subplot, anything. All of it could be a line of dialogue.
He said, I'm doing a rewrite. When do you go back to Israel? And I said, I don't know, about 5 days hence, whatever it was. He said, I think I'll have it ready in time so you can read it on the plane going back.
And I was young, and somebody said, where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. And I said, oh, I can do this in 12 days.
Well, I was really impressed. And that's the way it went. I did get a rewrite, and I did read it on the plane going back to Israel, and it was a much improved script.
Well, nobody rewrites in a couple of days. Nobody in Hollywood does. Well, Nick did. Nick sat down and reformed some of the story, and I thought it was terrific.
Jim, what the hell's the matter with you? Other people have birthdays. Why are we treating yours like a funeral?
Bones, I don't want to be lectured.
The age factor affects Bill Shatner a lot because he's a lot older than I am. It's not a problem for me.
I, of course, felt that with a lot of powder and a very thick base of cosmetics could preserve the fact that I hadn't aged. I felt I carried it off. A lot of people didn't feel that way, but and lipstick's very important to avoid the aging process.
And I don't know that Bill wanted so much to be 50 years old to the world. So I started talking. I don't even remember exactly how it came about. I said, we have watched people age, our favorite movie stars age from being in their 20s to being in their 80s. And some of those great stars did it with great grace, and others didn't. And, you know, there's one example I can think of, because it just popped into my mind. I said, of an actor who aged so gracefully over the decades that his aging became part of who he was. And you are his likely successor. You remind me of him. It was a true statement. It wasn't a con. I really did believe that. He said, well, who? I said, Spencer Tracy. He said, well. A year later, I realized that I had seen Judgment at Nuremberg when it first came out. It was Bill Shatner's first, possibly earliest Hollywood movie role. He was dynamically young, and he was the aide to Spencer Tracy. And you could tell from that performance that he was like, oh my God, I'm on a stage with Spencer Tracy.
The beauty of Star Trek II was the fact that we tried to go back to the original series and the depth and the heart and the character of the original series. So when somebody suggested my son is there, and therefore my wife or my ex-wife or the mother of the son, I don't recall whether I married her or not, it only added to the texture of the story. And to have my son captured and my son killed, and well, it was great stuff. And then never to see Khan. I never saw Khan, but that's another story.
We got in a very precarious situation. We started writing the script. We're going to get Ricardo, but nobody had ever bothered to say, Ricardo, would you like to do this movie with us? And we were getting pretty close to a green light when I remember we said, we better check and see if Fantasy Island and other things will permit him to do this.
I was finishing the 6th season of Fantasy Island, in which I had been a very controlled man, you know, guiding everybody through the island in total control, you know, never show emotion. So they came to me with this project, and I read the script, and I thought, well, it'd be interesting, but the part is, I don't know, after 6 years of doing a television series, I thought I wanted to do something, a part that had a little more size, let's say. But then I read it, and I thought, well, wait a minute, when I'm not on the screen, they're always talking about me, so the part will seem more important. Anyway, I became intrigued by it, and I said, yeah, I'll do it. It'd be fun to do. And I started looking at the script and beginning to study the character, which I knew from the past, but nevertheless, I thought, well, I'll articulate a little bit some of the scene, and I started saying the dialogue, and I said, my Lord, I sound just like Mr. Rourke in Fantasy Island. The audiences are going to laugh at me. This is going to be a disaster for me. What can I do? And I was already committed to it. And so I asked to be sent a tape of the original Space Seed, and I ran it. And I ran it again, and about the 3rd or 4th time, I started to remember what I was trying to do as an actor then. And pretty soon, this character started to sort of take life inside of me. And I thought the only difference is that then, I was then, and today, where is this character? Well, he's been abandoned in a planet where everything went wrong, and his wife, whom he loved passionately, dies this horrible death with little animals that go in her ear. And the one obsession he has now is to get revenge against Kirk, whom he blames for death. So I thought that was an interesting character. And then I started reading, and this time I articulated, and to my satisfaction, at least, I didn't sound like Mr. Rourke at all. I started getting the essence of the character that I had originally done.
You still remember
Admiral, I cannot help but be touched. I, of course, remember you.
What is the meaning of this attack?
It is ironic that in this great confrontation between these two Titan icons, or iconic Titans, that Kirk and Khan, with their K-alike names, one syllable, all starting with K, don't ask me why, that they never actually play a scene together. And that was certainly tough.
Khan, you bloodsucker. You're gonna have to do your own dirty work now. Do you hear me? Do you?
Kirk was in a different ship, and I was in this ship, and never the twain shall meet, and therefore I could never have a conversation with him. What happened was that I was doing my scenes, with passion, talking to a wall, literally the wall of the studio, because he wasn't there. And the lines were coming back to me from the script girl, who was one of the sweetest persons I've ever met in my life. But she was not really an actress, nor should she be. So I was giving these lines, about Kirk, you. And the line would come from this little sweet voice saying, well, but I don't understand. Yes, you do. No, but I really. And I tell you, it was singly one of the most difficult things I ever had to do in my life. To maintain this character, having a response from somebody that was not Captain Kirk, then Captain Kirk. And so that was the difference. In the first one, I felt more at ease talking to him and enjoying the rapport and the dueling with words and so forth. In this case, it was very difficult reacting to the script girl's voice.
And I should also say, while we are discussing Ricardo Montalban, that is his chest. That is the question I am most often asked about Star Trek II, the chest of the Wrath of Khan. And they ask if that's his chest, and it is his chest.
The original ending of the picture was grimmer, more final. It said Spock is dead. The picture ended over the feelings of Kirk in that wonderful moment when he says, of all the souls I have encountered in my travels, his was the most human. That's how we were leaving the picture. The preview audience was aghast. There was silence in the theater. And what have I done? Crept into my mind. What have we all done? And people walked slowly out. It was leaving a funeral. So we had a couple of meetings, and we said, it's a great ending. It's a dramatic ending, but it's a downer of the worst sort, and it may end the franchise. There may not be another Star Trek. Nicholas was very properly adamant that this was what we had written and this is what we should film.
I began to have second thoughts about the death of Spock. I had, as I said earlier, bought into it because I thought this will be the last of the Star Trek movies for sure, and which goes to the issue of whether or not I have precognition. The answer is no, I don't. I'm sometimes pretty good instinctively, but in this case, no one could foretell that we were going to do a whole bunch of movies. So when we began to make the film, and I began to realize that we had the kind of energy and we had the kind of chemistry amongst the cast and the storytelling opportunity that we used to have when we were making good Star Trek episodes, I began to wonder if indeed there might not be a future for Star Trek. And here I was committed to leaving it. So, because I committed to leaving it based on the notion or on the perception that this was going to be the last film. And now here we are making a film that promises a future for Star Trek rather than an end. So I began to be concerned about that.
That obviously sparked in me, should I kill him now that he's having a good time? Should I kill him? Is that fair? It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. But I I don't think his enthusiasm went that far as to say, so let's do another one, okay? Don't kill me. He didn't say that. But I began to think it was a smart idea to preserve some future appearance by Spock in some way. I didn't know what way.
The day we did the death scene was extremely sensitive for me. I think for others too, but certainly for me. I remember vividly, just as we were about to shoot Spock going into the chamber, Scotty is, I believe, unconscious. McCoy tries to stop me. I neck pinch him, and he collapses to the floor. Harv Bennett came to me and said, at that moment, before we shot that particular piece of business, what could you do to leave a thread for the future? And I thought, maybe he's thinking what I am, that there may be another movie. And I understood that immediately because, as I said, I felt that we were making a film that might lead to other films. So I said, let me do this. And I did a mind meld on the unconscious McCoy, where I simply said, remember. Now that was vague enough to open a door for any other kind of story. Remember meaning what? You could develop a story out of that moment. I thought it might be a useful hinge to an open door to get into another story.
I said, great. It's perfect. And I didn't say it because I immediately said, that's it, and we'll remember, you remember. I just knew that that was the right tonality.
Live long and prosper.
My theory about the coffin and Leonard Nimoy whispering something into McCoy's ear, which were the two things that, that looking back suggests that Spock might come back. Those two things had such calculation. Those two guys, Nimoy and Bennett, were in collusion. There's no question. And they kept me out of it. And to this day, I resent it. They knew. And the terrible thing is, neither Bennett nor Nimoy to this day will admit it, that they knew what they were doing. And when I saw the coffin and I saw Spock go like this to McCoy's ear, extraneous business. See, in a film, every shot has to count, every moment. You don't, especially when you're going towards the end, you don't have any extraneous moments or time. Everything's to tell the story. What was that all about? What was the coffin all about? Unless Nimoy expected to come back. We all mourned him. I hugged him, and I sobbed, and Leonard, you're not... He took me over the coals, that guy. And to this day, he won't admit it. They knew.
I'm sure you'll make him pay.
Oh, I am going to get him one day.
And what we did then was to modify the ending by adding one word, hope. We had ended the picture without hope. We now needed to restore, certainly in a science fiction context, the possibilities. And I remember taking the theme for that from Spock's oft-repeated lines in all the episodes I had seen. There are always possibilities. And it became the theme of what we did in the reshoots. Not a lot. We shot the last scene, and the last scene was rewritten to reflect life from death. And then ILM shot that remarkable sequence of the landed coffin.
It's very, very beautifully done. And James Horner wrote beautiful music to go with it. And that's the shot where you go onto the Genesis planet and you see Spock's coffin lying there. It's the sequel setup. And me, being such a flat-footed, unimaginative fellow, said, "He's dead, Jim. I don't see how you can bring him back, but shows you what I know, where all that popcorn was at stake."
It was at that point that we decided okay, let's really go for it and have Leonard do the prologue. So there was no prologue in Star Trek II, Space, The Final Frontier, because we decided in post-production to save it for the end and let Spock's voice, for the first time in Star Trek's history, read it. Okay. I think the final argument was that was too much, folks. That was too much. If you do that, they know you're going to bring him back. And those of us who were for that said, yeah, so?
Space, the final frontier.
We ran the picture for a preview audience with the revised ending. The audience rose as one, tears in their eyes and applause on their hands. And I felt like I felt like all of us had done something right and noble. And I know that's corny, but I walked out of the theater that night saying, yeah, that's the way it should be. I remember that after the picture was released, one of the most respected critics of that day, and still, Janet Maslin of the New York Times, began her review of Star Trek II with the sentence, "Well, that's more like it."